Hi friends! Welcome back to Brianna's Bookshelf. So today we are doing my February reading wrap up. And in the month of February, I read 8 books and I had 1 DNF. So without further ado, let's get into the books. I ended up DNFing Heartless Beloved by Lola King. This is the second book in the North Shore series, which is a dark romance series, which is kind of centered around this town that has 2 rival gangs living in it. And I was going to read this book for the dark romance reading vlog that came out last week. However, I ended up just not liking it and I decided not to continue. I've realized I don't think Lola King is quite the author for me, and that's okay. Her dark romance just has a lot more non-con than what I am willing to read, and it just simply hasn't been an enjoyable experience for me in the 2 books, in the book of hers that I've read, plus this one, which I decided not to finish. So I think that I'm probably fairly done with her as an author, or at least this series is just simply not for me, and that's okay. Then my lowest rating for the month was 3 stars, not too bad. And the first book I gave 3 stars was Penpal by Dathan Auerbach. And I read this because it was Brooklyn from Brooklyn's Library's best book of 2025. And I did enjoy this. I thought it was very much like a nostalgic, scary story. It definitely had creepypasta vibes, which makes sense because it was originally a Reddit horror story. And it basically centers around this child who kind of has this Penpal program that starts at his school, and he starts to have strange messages that he gets in this program. And it's all fairly vague until the end. It's one of those that like really keeps you in suspense. There's a lot of creepy atmosphere, scenes in woods. It just really, I feel like, well represents what it's like to be a child and to have that kind of fear of the dark, fear of strangers, all that good stuff that, you know, you never really get over, but it just changes somehow as you turn into an adult. I feel like reading Penpal really made me feel like I was connecting to the experience of the child as I was reading it, so that was interesting. However, there were some parts of the books that I just didn't love, and I felt like the ending didn't quite make sense to me. There were some things that weren't explained. So it was just a like, not a love. Then my other 3-star book for February was God of Pain by Rina Kent. I also read this for my dark romance reading vlog, and this is the second book in the Legacy of God series by Rina Kent. This series follows university students that go to these 2 rival universities that are on the same island. One university is English, the other university is like an American university in England. And they both have like very powerful people that attend these universities, and they both have these kind of underground clubs that are slightly sinister, and they are always like rivals and in competition with one another. And of course, this is a dark romance series, so we're following various MMCs and FMCs that are kind of related to the friend group and these 2 clubs as a whole. We got to follow Annika Volkov, and she was a mafia princess, so that was kind of a different thing for me to read about. I have never really read much mafia romance, so it was very interesting to have that perspective. And then the MMC was Creighton King, who is kind of from this rival university. Well, actually, him and Annika go to the same university, but Annika's brother goes to the other university, so it's a whole thing. There's like overprotective mafia family. There is a lot of different kinks that are explored in this book, and overall I would say it's dark romance for sure, but it definitely didn't feel as dark as Heartless Beloved. I feel like it's overall maybe somewhat more lighthearted. At least I also found that it was a little bit less intense for me personally than the first book in this series. So if you are interested in trying out dark romance, I would maybe suggest, depending on what sort of stuff you're interested in reading about, picking up this book, because again, I feel like there was not any non-con, there was maybe a tiny bit of dub-con, but overall I felt like it was much more mild in those respects. and I was really enjoying this book. Unfortunately, I just didn't love the way the romance came together at the end. Again, like Penpal, there were some things that I questioned and didn't quite make sense to me, so it just didn't really come together fully as a story. Then I had 2 books that I gave 4 stars. The first being What Hunger by Catherine Dang. And this I read for the Women's Wrong Support Group, which is Brooklyn, from Brooklyn's libraries. And I feel like I'd heard a little bit about this before, so I definitely had some like mild interest in it, but I wasn't sure that I was definitely gonna pick it up until I saw that it was her book club pick, and I was super excited to join in on all reading this at the same time. So I did end up getting it from the library. And What Hunger is definitely a good for her kind of story, and definitely coming of age. We're following this Vietnamese American teenager and her family. Her brother dies near the beginning of the book, and then she is left to grapple with the grief that is left behind in his wake. And she may or may not develop some sort of unusual hungers and cravings, if you get my drift. So that's kind of the vibe of the book, and it's definitely very like coming of age in an extremely dark way. It is, again, a very good for her type of book. Explores lots of themes of grief, of what it's like to be an immigrant and then a first-generation American. There was definitely some body horror in this, but I would say overall it felt a lot more literary horror, where it was not like super scary or anything, but more about like the themes of the book than the horror itself. But yeah, a little bit of body horror, and despite some of the gross aspects, there was also some really, really good descriptions of Vietnamese food in this book. We were talking about that in Brooklyn's live show, about how much good Vietnamese food was described and how it made us kind of hungry, which feels very ironic with the rest of the tone of the book. And yeah, I thought it was great, so I would highly suggest reading that one. Then I also gave 4 stars to The Blood We Crave Part 1 by Monty J. And this is the 3rd book in the Hollow Boys series. This is dark romance, and I also read this for my dark romance vlog. Now, this is interesting because this is an interconnected standalone series where each couple gets 1 book, except for this specific couple. They actually get 2 books, so their story is broken into Part 1 and Part 2. And so far, I've just read Part 1, and I really, really enjoyed it. It's definitely very out there. Like, I feel like this was the most unique romance I've ever read. So for kind of like the overall vibes of the Hollow Boys, we're following this group of boys that live in this small town that has a lot of like rich and powerful people that live there. And all of these boys are wealthy and come from powerful families, but they each have like a different aspect as to why they are kind of outcasts of society. Most of them have violent tendencies, mental health struggles, and are just kind of seen as the black sheep of the town. And so of course the 4 of them are best friends. And there's also this like very elite university that is in this town, and there's an underlying mystery going on as well that you kind of mostly dive into in the first book, but it of course continues throughout the series, so I can't get too into that mystery aspect. But The Blood We Crave was following Lyra and Thatcher, and Thatcher is of course one of the Hollow Boys. Lyra had lived in this town her whole life, and they have an extremely interesting connection, and that is that Thatcher's father is a serial killer, and he murdered Lyra's mother while she was there watching. And yeah, they do become love interests, so pretty strange setup for sure. I was unsure of how that would work. This is definitely one where I feel like the circumstances are so bizarre, you kind of just have to suspend your disbelief rather, and just enjoy the vibes. So everyone kind of suspects Thatcher of also having some sort of violent tendencies, but Lyra is absolutely obsessed with him. She's been obsessed with him ever since she was a child, actually. So it's also kind of strange in that I feel like a lot of books are he falls first. This is definitely she falls first, and she's obsessed with him, and like to an unhealthy degree. Like, it's very much something that I would not think is okay in real life, but in the book it is kind of enjoyable to read about. I just think their characters are so interesting. Lyra is also really into bugs. She studies like entomology, and she enjoys kind of just like death in general. Like she likes to hang out in cemeteries and things like that. She's kind of a horror girly herself. And Thatcher is just extremely cold, clinical, and cut off from everyone. Like he does not want to interact with anyone. But she continues to pursue him no matter what, and no matter the fact that he wants her to leave him alone. And so very, very interesting vibes. And yeah, I enjoyed it quite a lot. Again, it's just such a weird, unique one, but I really liked both of their vibes. And with them together, it was so interesting. It felt like they were both so messed up in different ways that the only people they could possibly be meant for is each other. So if you like an unconventional love story and you're okay with blood and maybe some unusual kinks, you should probably check trigger warnings. There's a lot of other aspects going on in this book. Maybe check it out. I wouldn't recommend it for everyone, but it is a good time in my opinion. Then I do have 2 books that I gave 4.5 stars this month. We have some pretty high ratings this month, which is very exciting. My first 4.5 star was Royal Assassin by Robin Hobb. This is the second book in the Farseer trilogy, and I have really been enjoying this series. I feel like I've been getting into the high fantasy again, not so much the romantasy, and I've really been enjoying it. So this series is basically following this boy who is a bastard of the king in waiting at the start of the book, and we follow him from childhood to kind of his young adulthood as he's being trained to become an assassin. And then of course in this book we're just following from what happens in book 1, and there's lots of drama. Our main character Fitz is kind of an irritating character to follow. Like at times I love him and at times I just want to smack him. So very interesting, and it really keeps you reading. Like there's just so many different things going on at once, and it feels very classical fantasy. So if you are just in the mood for a kind of classical fantasy series, there is a romance, but I would not call this romantasy at all. I'm actually kind of irritated by the romance personally. If you just kind of want assassin questy vibes, I would recommend the series for sure. Then my second book I gave 4.5 stars this month was also a fantasy, and that was The Fifth Season by N.K. Jemisin. And I actually read this on Kindle Unlimited, but I loved it so much that I immediately went out and bought this. And I also found out the rest of the series is not on Kindle Unlimited, so I bought the second book already too, and I'm so excited. This is also like a high fantasy kind of vibe, and it's extremely unique fantasy. So in this world, there's basically tons of tectonic activity. So there's always like earthquakes, volcano eruptions, that sort of thing. And so they're constantly having these kind of world-changing events that they'll call the fifth season, which are essentially like when, you know, a volcano erupts and the sun is covered by clouds, and so everyone has to adjust their form of living, that type of thing. And within it, there are these people who are born with magic where they can control the elements, like control the earth, but these people are actually quite ostracized and oftentimes hunted down if they are not first taken by the government, because they have the power also to create earthquakes if they are mismanaging their emotions. So towns are often driving these people out. And there's also a group of these people who have this magic who work for the government. So if they're taken at a young age and then trained by the government, they are able to help mitigate the natural disasters for the government. And we're starting off by following 3 different female characters. So we get different perspectives as this giant tectonic activity happens and another season is starting. And it's extremely fascinating, extremely unique. There is some romance, but I would not call this romantasy by any means. It's definitely more of just like relationship focused and seeing interpersonal dynamics, and very, very good. I'm so excited to continue this. It was like just a breath of fresh air to see this totally different concept that I've never read anything like. Then I also have 2 5-star books that I read in February. Again, I just had such good ratings. I'm very happy with my reads in February. And the first is Inciting Joy by Ross Gay, and this is actually a collection of essays which I've been reading for quite a long time. Like I've been reading 1 essay kind of per month for a while now, and I finally finished this in February and I absolutely loved it. Ross Gay is a poet and he writes essays, and he's also a professor at, I forget what school, but yes, all around academic writing marvel. And he writes these as personal essays about different things that inspire joy for him. And the stories in here are so deep and so meaningful. Of course, I did not personally connect with every single one, but they still all meant so much to me. In fact, there's a whole essay in here about like basically what it is to be a man and like confronting manhood and all the stereotypes that comes with that. And it actually made me cry. So this was very, very powerful and emotional, and definitely one that I will come back to and reread some of these essays that had a lot of personal effect on me. But yeah, I thought this was incredible, and I'm definitely going to have to pick up another collection by Ross Gay because I know that he has several other collected works that are out thus far. Then last but certainly not least, we have Where I End by Sophie White. And I also read this for my BookTubers Best Books of 2025 video. And this was Sarah from Wicked Readings' favorite book of 2025. And this is also one that I know Angel from Angel Can't Read loved. And several other people I think have since read this, like Alicia from Alicia Runs and Reads, I believe also loved this and gave it 5 stars. It's just incredible. It is literary horror. It takes place on this Irish island, and it is essentially about this woman whose mother is completely bedridden and basically non-responsive. And she is grappling with the horrors of what that means for her life. And it's honestly just deeply disturbing. There's so much body horror. There is so much horror just in like acknowledging what it's like to be someone's caregiver, things that we might not want to consider, that we might not want to, I guess, paint in a bad light. This book really confronts those things head on, and it's quite intense. And then we also have this kind of element of the island being potentially cursed. And overall, if you're okay with something that's extremely bleak and has body horror, I could not recommend this book highly enough. I just thought it was amazing. Most like beautifully written, incredible quotes while being so disgusting and depraved in other ways. It was just incredible. So if you're a horror girly, definitely check that one out if you have not read it already. All right, so those were all the books that I read in the month of February. Let me know down below what your favorite book that you read in February was, and I will see you all in the next one. Bye.